sponsors the weather.
Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, Monday to Thursday from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. We don't lecture to you or try to tell you what to think. We do a deep delve into a topic with views from across the range of debate, therefore leaving you, the viewer, to make up your own mind. Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, 4 till 6, Monday to Thursday. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
A very good afternoon. It is 3 o'clock. Welcome to the Briefing PM. Over the next hour, we'll be looking at Christmas lockdown fears. This comes as the Cabinet is meeting as we speak to decide whether there could be further restrictions in the lead up to Christmas, or could it be after Christmas. It looks almost certain, though, that restrictions are on the way. We'll also be looking at the resignation of Lord Frost and what it means for Boris Johnson's government. We'll be speaking to the former Chancellor, Lord Lamont, about that. And also, has there been a victory for free speech activists today? Toby Young seems to think so on hate crime. That and much more over the next hour. But first, here is the news at the top of the hour with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 3 o'clock. Senior Cabinet Ministers are meeting this afternoon to discuss the latest situation on COVID-19 and potential measures. Some MPs have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisers for new restrictions before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the Cabinet are said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the next few days. The government's chief scientific advisor, though, Sir Patrick Vallance, is urging for tightened rules to prevent the NHS being overwhelmed. Hospitality leaders are urging the Chancellor to offer emergency financial support in the next 24 hours after a fall in bookings because of the Omicron variant. The operator of the Real Creek and Frankamenko restaurant chain says rescue packages are needed regardless of whether further COVID measures are introduced. The government says support for businesses is kept under constant review. Meanwhile, the chief executive of the Nighttime Industries Association, Michael Kill, told GB News the restrictions are confusing, with businesses encouraged to stay open, but customers told to stay away.
We're hugely concerned, not only for the survival of businesses, but people's livelihoods. People that we've committed and managed to build up and gain momentum for this trade is now being stifled massively. COVID passes were presented as a mitigation that would keep nightclubs open. That's clearly not the case. And the concern that we have is at some point leading up to New Year's Eve is going to create some level of displacement. And that could go into things like illegal events or push people back into households, which we know full well are, highly transmissible.
The Labour Party is also urging greater support for businesses throughout the festive period. They're asking for the reintroduction of sick pay for employees who've tested positive with COVID or those who have to self-isolate with symptoms.
What you don't want in a situation like this is businesses and workers having to calculate, should we do the right thing here or is there a cost to us? So it's really important that we've got a good sick pay system in place and one that is also helpful to the small businesses involved.
The Deputy Prime Minister has denied his colleagues broke lockdown rules after a picture emerged showing the Prime Minister and his staff having cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden during the first national lockdown. The Guardian newspaper released this photograph showing the Prime Minister drinking at a table with Carrie Johnson and 2 others, and there are 16 other staff members nearby. Dominic Raab stressed the garden was a place of work and that sometimes staff would have a drink after a long day or a long week. Retired teachers are being urged to return to the profession to help with COVID staff shortages in the new year. Some schools are already preparing for the possibility of online learning. But the Education Secretary is appealing for qualified teachers across primary, secondary and further education to return to classrooms to help maintain face-to-face teaching. Now, in other news, at least 375 people have died. More than 500 are injured following the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year. More than 50 others are still missing. Officials say several central provinces are struggling with power and communication outages, and they're pleading for food and water. At its strongest, Typhoon Rai brought winds reaching up to 168 miles an hour. The World Economic Forum has delayed its annual summit in Davos following concerns over the Omicron variant of coronavirus. The conference, held in the Swiss mountain resort, sees major political and business leaders from around the globe attending. The meeting will instead be held in the early summer. Television presenter Rachel Riley has been awarded £10,000 in damages after winning a libel case against a former aide to Jeremy Corbyn. The Countdown presenter sued Laura Murray over a tweet that was found to be defamatory. At the time, Miss Murray was a manager in the then Labour leader's office. The High Court judge said the tweet, posted more than 2 years ago, had caused serious harm to Rachel Riley's reputation and that she was due vindication. The UK sandwich chain Pret a Manger has been told to consider reviewing its advertising campaign for a £20 a month coffee subscription after reports of complaints from customers. Well, it's the advice from the Advertising Standards Authority. Pret subscribers can choose 5 drinks every day as part of the deal. But customers have complained that they were often unable to get smoothies on the deal, as many shops said they were unable to make them. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. Now to the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
A very good afternoon. Welcome to the Briefing PM. This is your fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour on the programme. It's looking increasingly likely that we could see further restrictions either before or after Christmas. We'll be speaking to one professor who's worried about the mental health effects on this, and we'll be debating about whether the government needs to act now or hold off until we get the full data. And Lord Frost, the Brexit minister, has quit the government. What does this mean for Brexit and for the Tory party, which is increasingly divided over high tax, interventionist policies? And we'll be speaking to the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lord Lamont, on that. And police are recording of non-hate crime incidents has been ruled as unlawful by a judge in what the Free Speech Union is calling a major victory for freedom. We'll be speaking to its founder, Toby Young, a little later as well. And all those stories, want to hear what you've got to say, please do get in touch. You can email us, as always, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me @gbnews. Very good afternoon and welcome to the programme. Well, let's start with that bombshell resignation at the weekend. Lord Frost, the Brexit minister, resigned because of the political direction of Boris Johnson's government. His departure, before many of the problems of the that have been involved, inherently in the Northern Ireland Protocol have been resolved, have left some Brexiteers concerned. Frost also cited his opposition to potential new restrictions and indeed to the government's Plan B in his resignation letter. And we'll be covering some of those discussions taking place, of course, with the Cabinet meeting this afternoon a little later in the programme. But the issue has further exacerbated tensions within the Conservative Party about Boris Johnson's perceived drift away from his libertarianism and towards what some of his critics would claim is big state and high tax and even authoritarian policies. Well, let's digest all of this with Lord Lamont. He is, of course, the former Conservative MP and Chancellor of the Exchequer and joins me in the studio. Lord Lamont, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's start, first of all, with the resignation of Lord David Frost. What was your reaction? Were you surprised as everyone else?
Well, I was shocked, and then I realised I shouldn't be surprised because he had trailed it a little bit in a speech he made at the Königswinter conference, the Anglo-German conference. But I was shocked because I think it leaves the job not completed. The Northern Ireland Protocol is very problematic. You have this issue of goods going from the mainland here, GB, to Northern Ireland, having to have all sorts of checks. That is interrupting business, has caused some businesses to stop supplying to Northern Ireland. And then, of course, you have the so-called democratic deficit, that you have European laws being applied in Northern Ireland in which the citizens of Northern Ireland have no say. So there was quite a lot of stuff that still had to be negotiated. So I was disappointed. I very much admire Lord Frost. I think he's very, very good. But I was sad that he left. And I think there are some very big issues which Liz Truss will now have to try to resolve. But of course, she is very, very busy as Foreign Secretary anyway. To have this on top of it is quite a mouthful. Indeed,
and with international aid, of course, within the Foreign Office now as well. He was called Frosty the No Man. It was what he was branded in Brussels. They've seen him as quite hostile. In fact, some European officials seemed quite pleased that he was resigning. One quoted in the Times today said, "This is a great present. Frosty has melted at last. Is there a Brexit thaw in Downing Street?" Do you think those in Brussels and elsewhere will be pleased with Lord Frost's resignation?
Well, I don't think Liz Truss will be a pushover. I think they'll get a bit of a shock if they think that. I don't think Lord Frost was aggressive or unreasonable. I think we had some contradictions in the protocol. The protocol, you know, was never the finished document, the finished article. There were some loose ends there. You read the text, you can see that it was plainly envisaged that some further changes would be made. And indeed, there are provisions within the Northern Ireland Protocol that say if it's not working satisfactorily, if it's working against the interests of one party, they are entitled to suspend and to discuss those provisions. That's all written into the protocol, so one shouldn't have been surprised that the British government was taking action to try and get these problems sorted out.
I mean, this was a deal, though, that Lord Frost himself negotiated. I mean, his critics would say that, you know, frankly, in the end, Northern Ireland was chucked under a bus, despite the promises, simply because Boris wanted to get Brexit done.
But what I'm saying is that if you read the document, it is perfectly clear that there are some unfinished items in it. So, you know, that doesn't mean that the government are changing their minds or ratting on something that they had signed up to. There plainly were going to be further discussions anyway on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And indeed, part of it even envisaged that the document itself might be superseded by another document. So, you know, it isn't a case of Britain ratting on its obligations. Let's move away from the protocol if we can, because Lord Frost has insisted that him and the Prime Minister are on the same page, essentially, when it comes to Brexit. What he did talk about, though, is big policy differences, not least on high tax. And he referenced that, of course, in that speech that you made as well a couple of months ago. Clearly, you know, this is someone on the right of the party who's not very comfortable with this government, which is increasing taxes to the highest level since, what, the 1950s? Yes, I don't like high taxes myself. I think the policy of a Conservative government ought to be to have the lowest possible competitive taxes. But let's be fair to the government on this. When people, as you've just said, say that we've got the highest taxes since 1945, the war, we've been through a situation rather similar to a war, and the government has had to spend huge amounts of money. It had no choice. It had an obligation unless the economy was going to collapse, and they've spent nearly £400 billion on the furlough scheme, the bounce-back loans, all the aid to industry, keeping people in jobs, as a result of which we have very good low unemployment despite having had the lockdown. It's not surprising that first public expenditure as a total has gone way, way up. It'll come down again as the economy recovers, and it is already, as a proportion of GDP, coming down as the economy recovers. But as public spending has gone up, so taxes have had to go up. The government have taken some of it in terms of long-term borrowing, but it can't take it all. That would be reckless, it would be stupid. You know, Mrs. Thatcher always used to say, getting deficits down comes first before other things.
In saying that, Lord Frost, we know, was very close to Boris Johnson. Those within government suggest that actually he's one of the few people he can rely on. It is a significant blow, isn't it? You know, Boris Johnson's not got lots of political friends, and yet one of them seems to have left his cabinet because he doesn't agree with the direction of the government. That's quite a big blow for the Prime Minister, isn't it?
Well, I think it is a problem, and although I have tried to explain why I think taxes are high, I think a lot of Conservative backbenchers are a bit unreasonable about this. But the problem is that Lord Frost is on the same page as them, or seems to be. He didn't actually make this point in his resignation letter. I think you're building on a lot of things that were perhaps in the Königswinter speech or have just been rumoured to be the case. But if that is Lord Frost's viewpoint, I think that does create some problems for the Prime Minister, because it's also the view of some backbenchers.
Now, one of the things he did mention in the letter, though, is the restrictions. It's clear that, you know, he was not terribly happy with even the suggestion last week or the vote on bringing in Plan B. I think it's fair to assume he would not be in favour of further restrictions in the lead up to Christmas. I mean, what's your sense? You know, you've been at the heart of government. No one's denying that these decisions are easy. In fact, you know, this is probably one of the most difficult decisions Boris Johnson yet again is going to have to make after a series of difficult decisions. What's your sense of the judgment about where you think he should be on this?
Well, I hope we won't have mandatory restrictions before Christmas. I think that would be extremely unpopular. But, you know, you've got to give Boris some credit. He has, in July, I think, ignored the advice of some people on stage, some of the scientists, and went for a far looser regime that was being advocated by many of the so-called experts. And that worked pretty well. With the Delta variant, we were doing fine. It was leveling off. Hospitalization rates and death rates were actually falling until Omicron came along. So I think the Prime Minister is quite prepared to face some of the experts down if he thinks that is the right thing to do. I would think it would be a big mistake to introduce something that was statutory, that demanded the recall of Parliament. I think that would be very, very problematic. I think at most you could perhaps have some further guidance or some suggestions, but I don't think you should go beyond that at this stage. But let me say this about this variant of coronavirus. Although some people think the evidence from South Africa suggests that the death rates and hospitalization rates will be lower, if it is 50% faster in spreading, then a much smaller number of cases of hospitalization can arise very, very quickly. A bigger ratio, a smaller ratio on a larger number. And that can create, with the bunching of hospitalizations, huge problems for the health service.
Yeah.
And that is the argument that I think actually is the knockdown argument.
Essentially, if millions of people all have it at the one time, it becomes a very difficult thing. Just two final questions. Just on that point, and we heard it in the news bulletin there, hospitality are crying out for help. Other businesses are as well, because they're saying they're the worst of all worlds, which is, i.e., they're still open because the government's not told them to shut down, but lots of people are cancelling events in the run-up to Christmas and dinners. Surely the government has to do more to help those businesses.
Well, I'm not against targeted relief for certain sectors that face acute problems. I would be very strongly against reintroducing the furlough scheme or general assistance to industry. If we're going to learn to live with this virus, then we've got to learn to live with it, and that includes business. But I think the hospitality industry is under some unique pressure, really, and I think there is a case for looking at some further help for it.
And just very finally, you've been in politics for a long time. Last week, when we look back at it, one of the largest rebellions a Conservative Prime Minister has seen in years, the loss of a by-election in a pretty spectacular swing, the resignation of a key government minister, and all these allegations that seem to not go away about what happens with cheese and wine in Downing Street and political parties. How difficult was last week for Boris Johnson, just in terms of historical political weeks that have been difficult for Prime Ministers in the past.
Well, I'm sure you remember very well Harold Macmillan's famous remark when he was asked what he most feared, and he just said, "Events, dear boy, events," and that's exactly what's happened. It was a big rebellion, but don't forget, there have been bigger rebellions. Tony Blair had an even bigger rebellion. He didn't stop him going to war with Iraq and being in Prime Minister for another 5 years.
So are you optimistic, or what's your sense? People writing off Boris too early, I suppose, is my question.
I think they are writing him off too early. I think it would be madness to have a leadership election. I hope the Conservative backbenchers won't contemplate that. Perhaps the Prime Minister's lost a couple of his 9 lives, but he's still there.
Okay.
And I also think that in the long run, if we get through without having a huge health crisis, people may look back on this and really be quite impressed with how the government has steered through this ever-changing crisis.
Okay, Lord Lamont, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming in. Lord Lamont there joining us on fascinating politics at the moment. Okay, we're going to pause there on the briefing. It's going up to 20 minutes past 3. Thank you for your company on this Monday afternoon. Coming up, one of the latest on that, I think we can call it an emergency cabinet meeting, unprecedented certainly in terms of the scheduling on a Monday afternoon. Ministers debating potentially what restrictions might need to be put in place either before or after Christmas, whether the latest or what is emanating from there. We'll be speaking to Claire Fox as well about that and much more in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather on this Christmas week.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. There'll be plenty of weather to talk about later this week, but for the next 36 hours, well, it stays mostly cloudy but dry. And it's just fairly breezy in the southwest, but otherwise not a lot going on with this large area of high pressure sitting close to the UK. One small thing that's happened through Monday is a cold front is crossing the country from the east. A minor feature, but it introduces higher cloud bases into the east and a bit more broken cloud, I think, as we head into Monday night. So a better chance of these cloud breaks leading to a frost in places by the start of Tuesday. Quite tenuous cloud breaks, so they may come and go in places. But where we do get prolonged clear spells, rural parts of Wales, central England, Scotland, temperatures a few degrees below freezing as we start off Tuesday. Otherwise, where we keep that thin layer of cloud in the sky, it's going to be a milder start to the day, 2 to 4 Celsius. But I'm optimistic that through Tuesday we'll see more extensive cloud breaks developing. And that means for parts of the Midlands, Northern England, Wales, central and western Scotland, a reasonable chance of some sunny spells coming through, perhaps even southern England as well. Pleasant enough where that happens, but temperatures a degree or 2 down compared to Mondays. We're looking at highs of around 4 to 7 Celsius. And then, with those more widespread clear spells into Tuesday night and the start of Wednesday, I think a more widespread frost forming for the start of Wednesday with temperatures, again, a couple of degrees below freezing, but quite extensively across England, Wales and Scotland, whilst Northern Ireland sees the cloud build and quite early on, outbreaks of rain moving in here. The first signs of a change on the way the middle of this week. Those outbreaks of rain moving in bump into the colder air and we'll see some snow over the Scottish mountains. But otherwise, it looks more unsettled later this week.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel. They're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
A very welcome back to the break, back after the break, I should say, to GB News and to the briefing with me, Darren McCaffrey. As we've been saying, the Cabinet will be meeting this afternoon to discuss the latest data around the Omicron variant, the implications it may well have for us in England and indeed across the UK. Much speculation, of course, that there could be further restrictions being announced by the Prime Minister later on. However, the latest speculation amongst the lobby at Westminster, the political journalists covering the circumstances there, suggesting that we're not likely to hear any announcement today and that restrictions, if they are to be brought in, that it could be after Christmas, that the government and the Cabinet still very much waiting on the data, particularly around severity, to emerge from South Africa and indeed from other places like Denmark. Now, none of this is at all confirmed, and we'll have to wait and see from the fallout from that Cabinet meeting, but it does look like there could well be restrictions on the way, just that they will be after Christmas rather than before. Let's speak to Baroness Claire Fox, who joins us down the line. Good afternoon to you, Claire. First of all, and we'll get on to Lord Frost in a second and the political fallout from that over the weekend, just your sense about where we're at. The scientists this morning, and I say the scientists, most scientists, certainly connected with SAGE, seem to be saying the government don't really have time to wait, that if we do wait, it will be too late when it comes to potentially imposing restrictions to try and bring down cases. I see that hospitalisations in London are up 42% in the past week.
The percentages are quite high, but the numbers are not quite high, so it's important to untangle that. The other thing is that when they say it's, if we wait too long, that it'll be too late. I think that we all know that this new variant is throughout the community, spreading rapidly, and as yet, certainly and thankfully, not creating serious health problems for most people who get it in comparison with the numbers. So, we've got to be careful when you say too late for what. I mean, it all sounds very scary, and yet actually the data and the evidence is not there to suggest that we need to overreact or panic. And just when you say about, the speculation is they might bring in restrictions after Christmas, I've heard this 27th of December mentioned. Can I just point out that for a lot of people, that isn't after Christmas, that's mid-Christmas. Most normal people have Christmas at home with the close family, and then they spend time visiting extended family and friends and so on. So actually, if they bring it in on the 27th, and certainly if they're talking about bringing in level 2, which the rumour is, and your very own Tom Harwood said that too, that is incredibly prescriptive back to April 2020 when we hadn't got such mass vaccination. So I am concerned that there's pressure to react, and they're overreacting.
I suppose my point about it's too late is, and this is why it's really tricky for the government, is that we know people get infected, and I think then the average time, if you are very sadly going to get a severe illness from this, from potentially ending up in hospital, can anywhere from a week to 17 days, or 10 days to 17 days, and that's why it's quite difficult to judge, isn't it? Whether because if you leave it too long and then you take action, actually it's probably too late because the infection rates will then be even greater.
But the problem is that when people say, look at the evidence, and I'm looking at the international evidence. I'm talking to people who are looking at the international evidence. And as yet, what we are doing at the moment is saying we've got to close things down because it's possible that this might be a serious illness, but there's no evidence of that yet, but it's possible. And this is completely in contradiction to living with and so on and so forth. Now, it seems to be the case that what we're basing everything on is the worst case scenario. And we've heard the way the forecasters and so on have been using worst case scenarios. And I'm suggesting that there are other non-COVID costs. I mean, goodness knows what's happened to the hospitality industry. But also you talk to any cafes, any taxi drivers, anyone who's in the public sphere who have to carry on working, but actually there's no one around. People are self-regulating. For a start off, they've been frightened or they're frightened of catching it. And the other thing is that what people always say is the services won't count. And that's partly because of rules, not because of the variant. So what happens is you get you get it, you're not even ill. So people I know who've got it, they're not actually ill, not very ill, but they can't leave they're in isolation for 10 days. And of course, that's the rule, not the virus. That's the rule associated with the virus. And it's going to bring society to a standstill. I just don't think it's the right way to go.
Let's move on, Claire, if we can, because it's not the only difficulty facing Boris Johnson. And one of the reasons is that we think that Lord Frost quit the government at the weekend was over COVID restrictions. Though it must be said, he's been a pretty key ally of the Prime Minister, particularly when it comes to Brexit. And there is somewhat glee, it seems, in Brussels about his departure from the government, that Frosty has melted, I think, is what one official in the European Union said about it. Are you concerned that Lord Frost will not be leading these negotiations, considering they're far from over?
I'm totally concerned. I mean, I have to say that since being in the House of Lords, the one person that's been in the House of Lords I've been totally consistently impressed with is David Frost. He actually has to give a monthly question and answer session to the Lords, and he's been robust. He knows his brief inside out and backwards. He's one of the few people that I've got a real trust and believes in sovereignty, has completely been steadfast in relation to European Court of Justice and saying that it cannot have jurisdiction over Northern Ireland, and that would be a breach of sovereignty, and knows as detail as well as the broad philosophical points. So, only on Thursday, he did a briefing. He answered questions, and he was just as good. And the House of Lords is full of a kind of ultra Remainer, led by Andrew Adonis, but loads of them. And they kind of have a go and have a dig and talk about rejoining and blah, blah, every day, it seems to me. And he always sees them off intellectually. And he was only doing that on Thursday, and very reassuring it was too. So the fact that he resigns a couple of days later, I can tell you, if you're a Brexiteer, it makes your heart stink. And the problem about Liz Truss getting the brief is that you just feel it'll be part of foreign policy. It's a kind of deprioritisation of Brexit at a very time when actually it's got some considerable negotiation needed to resolve the protocol issue.
But in many regards, the protocol, you're right, still has to be worked out. But shouldn't relations fundamentally be treated as a as a foreign affairs issue. I mean, if we're going to move to a world which is essentially post-Brexit, we have to make it a normalised relationship with the rest of Europe, having a single government department devoted to it. We don't do that with anywhere else in the world. Seems a little far. Doesn't it make sense now?
I'm not suggesting that this goes on in perpetuity, and nobody else would do either. You've made the point that this is mid very serious negotiations. There are a range of aspects of the deal that are not yet resolved, right? Fisheries is one of them. All sorts of details need ironing out, and the protocol is the most acute. And at the heart of those deals and those tensions and those resolutions is the key questions around the sovereignty question. And I'm suggesting that until they are resolved, then it can't just be a normal part of foreign policy. And by the way, the UK might want it to be and would want it to be, but the EU are actually insisting on their sovereign right to have a law court have a say over the laws of Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. Regardless of whether one thinks it should or shouldn't be, it is. And therefore, it's a breach of sovereignty and a breach of Brexit. So I'm afraid that I do not, in the long term, fine, but not now, no. So, yeah, I'm nervous about it because I trusted him on that question. I don't know him or anything. I've just seen how he's performed. And I think it is significant that he has walked away because I kept seeing rumours in the paper and briefings and so on saying ECJ, softer line on the European Court of Justice in Northern Ireland. You ask Lord Frost, he says absolutely no softer line. And then you still see a briefing. So I think we can work out that he was not feeling backed up by his mate, Boris Johnson, the Brexiteer.
OK, Claire Fox, thank you very much. As always, Baroness Claire Fox there joining us talking about these restrictions and Lord Frost. And as I say, we are still waiting to hear what the fallout from that cabinet meeting might be, whether we could be seeing restrictions introduced, whether that will be before or after Christmas. We'll bring you the latest from Westminster as soon as we get it. Going to pause, though, on the briefing, bring you up to date with the latest news. Here's Rosie again.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Here are the latest headlines. Cabinet ministers are meeting to discuss the latest situation and potential measures around COVID-19. Some have reportedly pushed back against calls from scientific advisers for new restrictions before Christmas. According to the Times newspaper, around a third of the cabinet is said to be reluctant to introduce new measures in the next few days. The Deputy Prime Minister has denied his colleagues broke lockdown rules after this picture emerged showing the Prime Minister and his staff having cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden during the first national lockdown. The Guardian newspaper released the photograph showing the Prime Minister drinking at a table with his wife and two others, and there are other staff members nearby. But Dominic Raab stressed the garden was a place of work and that sometimes staff would, quote, drink after a long day or a long week. In the Philippines, at least 375 people have died and more than 500 are injured following the strongest typhoon to hit the Philippines this year. More than 50 others are still missing. Officials say several central provinces are struggling with power and they're desperately seeking food and water. The sandwich chain Pret-a-Manger has been told it should consider reviewing its advertising campaign for a £20 a month coffee subscription. That's advice from the Advertising Standards Authority. Pret subscribers can choose 5 drinks every day as part of the deal. But customers have complained they were often unable to get smoothies on the deal, as many shops said they were unable to make them. We'll have a full update for you at 4 o'clock.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Very welcome back to the briefing. As I say, we're keeping across what's happening at Westminster, about suggestions, speculation about further COVID restrictions in England, either before or after Christmas. But let's look at some of the government's advice and what it's already doing, having an effect, of course, on the economy across the UK. In Scotland, there, the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has urged people to minimise social contact, work from home and stay at home as much as they possibly can, whilst businesses have been urged, not legally ordered, to implement social distancing. It's estimated the cancellation of bookings in Scotland could cost the hospitality industry over £1 billion. Our reporter Davy Donaldson, who is in Scotland, has been looking at it.
Empty seats in venues, a sight that is being replicated across Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. The Linlithgow Rose Social Club has had to cancel 3 sold-out evenings between now and Hogmanay due to the rules regarding social distancing. How much do you reckon this cost the club?
We're certainly way in 5 figures. Way in 5 figures.
I mean, that is a huge, huge loss, for especially for an organisation like this.
Yes, especially at this time of the year where, and obviously everything that's went on with the 2 previous lockdowns, it's very, very disappointing.
How difficult is it to continue, or is that just something you can't think about at the moment?
Going forward, we have various things. There's already been a birthday party cancelled the first week in January for the same reasons, and we're not confident of things taking place after that.
A few miles away, the Corby Inn in Bowness has seen bookings cancelled, which means a loss of revenue during the busiest time of the year.
Well, so far, as over the last couple of days, we've had, since the advisory to stop mixing, we've had 120 cancellations so far to date. So our rules have never changed. So we've just, since the whole pandemic, we just followed the whole rules and we haven't changed them or relaxed them in any way, because we try to protect ourselves as well as our customers.
The Linlithgow Rose Social Club have been ringing hundreds of people back due to cancelling their festive nights. They were hoping to make some money after a tough couple of years and believe others are also affected.
The £37 included money that was going to be made for the social club, much needed revenue, especially with everything that's been going on. And obviously it's been the knock-on effect by caterers, cabaret artists and everybody that's been affected by this. And plus obviously ourselves with the amount of money that would be taken over the bar.
A lot of businesses in the hospitality sector are clearly feeling the pinch as the Omicron virus spreads quickly, and with First Minister Nicola Sturgeon advising people not to go out before Christmas, it's another huge loss in revenue.
David Donaldson there, our reporter in Scotland, and we are expecting to hear from Nicola Sturgeon tomorrow. Well, she'll set out plans for Scotland ahead of the Christmas period. Here in England, we know that Boris Johnson has and is considering additional measures in the run-up to Christmas. The government, as we know, have been meeting at cabinet level. This afternoon they met at 2 p.m, listening to some of the scientists who've been putting forward their suggestion for further restrictions, though there does seem to be opposition within the cabinet, with several senior ministers speculated, including the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, not in favour of some restrictions ahead of the Christmas period. Suggestions they could come into play in England post-Christmas, December 27, being much speculated about. But there is somewhat of a consensus that things may need to be done to help slow down the speed of Omicron, even if it is just changing advice to all of us not to socialise quite as much. Well, all this, of course, raises bigger questions about what restrictions do to our lives. Not just a theoretical argument, but one that may well have an impact on our health treatment and indeed on mental health, and particularly in the run-up to Christmas. Well, let's speak to Professor Paul Dolan. He joins us now down the line to talk about the impact of all of this. He's a behavioural scientist at the London School of Economics. Good afternoon to you, Paul. First of all, we all know that restrictions are always a balancing act, aren't they? They're somewhat of a sliding scale. What's your sense of where we're at the moment?
Yeah, hi, thank you for having me on. Yeah, I mean, my concern is the language that's used around this, is that restrictions, social distancing, as if they're all luxury goods, as if being around other people, as if having human, contact is something that is a sort of add-on to our existence. And we know that they're a fundamental part of what makes us who we are. They're also a fundamental part, by the way, of how long we live and how well we live. Not only how well we live, but how long we live. So people's life expectancies are significantly curtailed when they're feeling lonely. And so I've really been concerned since, March last year, that we've talked about social distancing as if it's a very glib and almost costless thing to do. And all of the evidence is really clear that it really isn't, that it impacts upon well-being and it impacts upon health and it impacts upon how we die and when we die. So I'd really like this conversation to take place in a much more grown-up and adult way, which is that if we are going to impose these kinds of restrictions on people's lives, that we're very much alert to the costs as well as the potential benefits.
I mean, I think in many regards, people are now alert to those costs, aren't they? We've heard debates over the last 18 months about the impact that lockdowns have. Chris Whitty talks about that kind of sliding scale that, lockdowns or restrictions, we're not necessarily talking about lockdowns, but more severe restrictions do have an impact on people's lives. But at the end of the day, if there is an immediate public health risk that is brought about by people being around other people, then something needs to be done about that.
Yeah, maybe, but of course the policy process isn't seemingly working like that, right? It's that SAGE will meet, SAGE will discuss the transmission risks, SAGE will make models about those. SAGE has nearly always been wrong on the pessimistic side, right? If you look at everything over the last 18 months, they've on every occasion estimated things to be worse than they turn out. And that's with very good reason. There is a clear incentive for them to do that. They have an incentive to be wrong in one direction. It's much better for them to be overly pessimistic than it is for them to underestimate things. But wrong in the right direction for transmission risk is wrong in the wrong direction for its impact upon everyone's lives. So again, when we talk about the restrictions, it's okay, well, things haven't turned out as bad as we expected them to be, but they have turned out worse than we would expect them to be if we've asked people to avoid social contact, to enjoy being around all the other, around their families, all of the things that make our life worth living and all of the things that improve how long we live. So I take issue with the idea that not that we've spoken about some of these impacts, but certainly with the fact that we haven't properly evaluated them. And as I say, the process seems to be... Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say that just on your point there about modelling, because we know it's been a big discussion point today, there was a SAGE scientist on the radio this afternoon saying, well, the modelling actually hasn't necessarily been right because to a large degree the government have actually followed their advice. So they've, the modelling's obviously based, the worst case scenario, on the government doing nothing, and yet at no stage in this pandemic has the government done nothing. And so in those circumstances, it's not been as bad as the modelling has suggested because the government have taken action, which has mitigated some of that risk.
But that's you could then say that any time that the estimates are wrong, it's because the measures were put in place and mitigated those harms. And I don't know that there's any good evidence to support that. If you look around the world, I mean, look, this is not my area of expertise. I can talk to you much more about the harms caused by some of the collateral harms caused by some of the measures put in place. But if you look around the world at countries that have had the most severe the most severe lockdowns compared to those that have had the least severe, and correlate that with the mortality risks, they're very weakly associated with one another. At best, the restrictions slow down the pace of the transmission. But my main point, again, speaks to us doing a proper welfare appraisal. It's a very simple point to make. It actually is not a very controversial point to make, that when you're dropping the pebble of policy intervention into the pond, you wouldn't want to just look at the splash, which in this case is its impact on the virus, but you would look at ripple effects too. You would look at all of the consequent effects that happen for people's health, well-being, life experiences and life expectancies. And when you do that, chances are you might reach a very different policy decision.
OK, Paul, really appreciate your time. That's Professor Paul Dolan, who is from the London School of Economics. They're talking about the wider implications, potentially imposing restrictions on all our lives, either in the run-up or indeed after Christmas. Let's move away from coronavirus, though, for a second. For years now, British police have been recording what they called non-crime hate incidents. What does that mean? Well, it means it could now be at an end, with a judge ruling that the practice is unlawful. A hate incident is any non-crime related incident which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice, according to the College of Police's guidance on hate crimes. There's no evidence needed for that black mark to appear against your name, and Priti Patel, the Home Secretary and others have questioned the controversial proactive approach the police officers and police forces have followed. The incidents can be seen on your record by future employers, potentially damaging someone's career. But now the Free Speech Union has declared a major victory after an ex-police officer has won a legal challenge against a national policy for forces to record gender-critical views as non-crime hate incidents. Well, joining me in the studio is the founder of the Free State Union, Toby Young. Good afternoon to you, Toby. Just first of all, before we get into the wider debate, just explain this very particular case that you guys have taken to court and won today.
Well, Harry Miller deserves the credit, the ex-copper who has taken the College of Policing to court. We've supported him, and had he lost and had a cost award against him, we would have helped him pay his legal fees, but thankfully he won. So he took Humberside Police and the College of Policing to court last year, to the High Court, challenging a non-crime hate incident which had been recorded against his name because of supposedly transphobic tweets. He hadn't committed a crime, but the police decided that he was guilty of a non-crime and recorded that against his name. And if he had applied for a job working with the vulnerable or with children, and his employer had done an enhanced DBS check, that would have come up in all likelihood on his criminal record and might have prevented him from getting that job because he didn't commit a crime. I mean, absolutely outrageous Orwellian dystopia territory. Anyway, so he took Humberside Police, who'd recorded this non-crime hate incident against his name in the National Police Database, and the College of Policing to the High Court. The High Court judge ruled in his favour on one count. He said they shouldn't have recorded that against your name. That was quite wrong. What you did shouldn't have been classed as a non-crime hate incident. But the judge also said that following the guidance issued by the College of Policing, which Humberside Police have been doing, was lawful. So that's the aspect of the judgment Harry appealed in the Court of Appeal, and today the Court of Appeal ruled, no, Harry, you were right about that too. It's unlawful for the College of Policing to issue this guidance and for the police to follow it. It's an unlawful interference in freedom of expression and a violation of our Article 10 free speech rights under the European Convention of Human Rights.
So how have we ended up here? Is this just a well-meaning policy that's kind of got out of hand, or, I mean, there will be people who clearly think that this is recording these non-crimes is a good thing. No? How have we ended up here?
I think it's partly the response of the police to the Macpherson report, the investigation into the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And on the back of that, they think that it's their business, it's proper police business to try and nip any of these potential crimes in the bud. So if you tweeted something inappropriate, something that someone has deemed as transphobic, like misgendering someone on Twitter, the theory is, the rationale is, that might prompt you in due course to commit a genuine hate crime, so let's cut that process off early. That's the kind of rationale, but it's ludicrous. It's like, you know, the precogs in that Tom Cruise film, The Minority Report, trying to stop crimes before they've actually been committed, which is ludicrous and not something that should be happening in a liberal society. People think this can't be happening very often. How many of these non-crime hate incidents are the police really recording? Well, the answer is a lot. The Daily Telegraph did a Freedom of Information request last year and discovered that between 2014 and 2019, police forces in England and Wales alone had recorded 120,000 non-crime hate incidents. That's 65 a day. I mean, it's ludicrous that the police are wasting their time investigating and recording non-crimes when they could be investigating actual crimes.
Just in terms of, you know, obviously you've won this case today. In some ways, it backs up that there are checks and balances, doesn't it? It's, you know, built into our system.
Well, this victory has only been won because Harry Miller and others have been prepared to take an enormous risk in taking the College of Policing to court. In a case like this, the loser has to pay the other side's costs. Had Harry lost today, he would have been saddled with a bill of hundreds of thousands of pounds. I mean, that's one of the ways in which the Free Speech Union has helped. We said, if you lose, we'll help you pay that bill. But he's won, so there is no bill to pay. But it's been a huge risk for him. He would have lost his house, probably his business, and it's only because of his courage and tenacity, his willingness to fight this, that we're in the happy position of looking at this landmark free speech victory today.
In saying that, I mean, there are hate crimes, aren't there? And you don't argue that certain crimes should be viewed as hate crimes if the motivation is there based on prejudice around someone's gender or their sexuality or whatever. So the case is, and the government would argue this, I'm saying certain police or campaigners would argue, kind of actually dealing with these things very early on, it is important.
Yes, I mean, one of the differences between hate incidents and hate crimes is that for something to be recorded, or at least until today, for something to be recorded as a non-crime hate incident, the only evidence that the police needed to enter that on your criminal record, effectively, was the perception of the alleged victim. Nothing more. If they perceived you as being motivated by hostility towards one of their protected characteristics, then that was enough for the police to then record this as a non-crime hate incident against your name. Whereas with an actual hate crime, perception comes into it, but it's not the whole of the story. There are other tests that something has to meet before it can be judged a hate crime. So it's really the paucity of evidence required by the police to record a non-crime hate incident, which was part of the issue that and part of the reason the Court of Appeal upheld Harry's complaint.
OK, Toby, thank you very much indeed. Toby Young there from the Free Speech Union joining us in the studio. Thank you very much indeed. OK, well, that is it for the programme for today. We will be, of course, on air over the next couple of hours, bringing you up to date with the very latest that emerges from Westminster, potentially in regards to what's been said. There's some speculation that there may not be an announcement today, but we will let you know as soon as we do. I'm back again at 3 tomorrow. Tom Harwood is here at 9. Up next, it is Alex Phillips back for the afternoon agenda. But before all of that, here's the weather at the start of this Christmas week. It might even snow on Christmas Day. I'll see you tomorrow.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. There'll be plenty of weather to talk about later this week, but for the next 36 hours, well, it stays mostly cloudy but dry, and it's just fairly breezy in the southwest, but otherwise not a lot going on with this large area of high pressure sitting close to the UK. One small thing that's happened through Monday is a cold front is